Good afternoon all. So we'll give it a minute or so for everybody to join, so we'll start today's webinar. So we'll just wait another minute. There's quite a few of you joining, so we'll give it another half a minute and then we'll start. Good, well, let's start. So good afternoon all, and thank you for joining us. And today's webinar is a strategy for integrated decontamination at NHS Trust. And I'm pleased to say that this time we're joined by Tom Lister, our Head of Client Development, Andrew Donegan, Head of Facilities at Isle of Wight NHS Trust, and Ernie Hayward, Decontamination Champion at Isle of Wight NHS Trust. So what's coming up? So today we're going to talk about the challenges faced by Isle of Wight NHS Trust in effectively decontaminating blue light and PTS vehicles. We're going to talk about the solutions to diverse strategy and the implementation of ambulance and PTS vehicle decontamination and whole ward decontamination within the hospital. And we're hoping to have a discussion of early results and next steps. And at the end of this webinar, as usual, we're going to have a Q&A section where we're going to try and answer as many of the questions as we can. So please use the Q&A tab to post your questions. So Inivos is a specialist business focused on developing of technologies and services to reduce the risk of patients acquiring infection in clinical environments. And our aim is to enable care environments to deliver better care faster. And when we work with our customers, we tend to follow this three-step approach. So first, we tend to understand the infection needs within the clinical environment. And this is a key step that allows us to use the knowledge, then to design detailed and practical solutions to best meet that need. And finally, we deliver the results and project manage the process to ensure successful technology implementation. And then with that in mind, I'd like to hand over to Tom.
Thanks a lot, Tavis, and good afternoon all. Thanks for joining. So I'm going to talk through the challenges and a brief outline of a solution for decontaminating emergency and PTS vehicles from our work at Isle of Wight. Before I do that, just a little on the importance of and why we engaged with Isle of Wight over this. So often when we work with our clients with, say, an increased level of infection, often what we find is that the area in the hospital where those infections are manifesting themselves isn't necessarily the area in which the problem exists, if you like, in terms of contamination. And in fact, I was on a call with a hospital in Germany this morning, and they've currently got an outbreak of VRE in their intensive care unit. Through whole genome sequencing, they know that the problem didn't originate in ICU. It's because ICU is kind of a collecting house of a number of areas around the hospital. And the understand, design, deliver process that Tavis just mentioned, we often like to work with our clients to actually look at the patient journeys and understand where the problem has started. And often it points us to the hospital front end. So for example, the ED, medical assessment unit, short stay wards. What really got our attention at Isle of Wight was the concept of taking it a step further back than that and looking at what happens with patients before they even arrive at the hospital and what is within our control to actually prevent them coming into contact with contamination. Likewise, with our other patient transport vehicles, it may be that there are acquisitions out in the community, but again, what's in our control, and are we busy taking patients around in contaminated vehicles? So that was what engaged us and the kind of importance behind it. When we broach the subject with hospitals, and especially with infection control colleagues, the challenges that we come across, number one is, well, look, we're talking about blue light service here. how do you think you're going to take a vehicle out of action for 2 hours to decontaminate it? You know, what if somebody has a heart attack and that ambulance is needed? And so that's the first challenge, is that perception that because we have an emergency vehicle, it's impossible to access it to effectively decontaminate it. Secondly, with some of the organizations that we work with, there's a lot more energy goes into being reactive than being proactive. So we might throw a lot of effort when the horse has bolted, so to speak. Whereas the organizations that we work with that have gone on to publish significant and sustained measurable improvements in their levels of infection, typically it's where they put in place proactive measures to actually constantly reduce the bioburden that patients are coming in contact with. Thirdly, we often find that clinical staff really buy into the ideas around proactive decontamination, and they can see the benefit for their patients, but it's just a question of, you know, how do we get on and do this thing? And again, where we see success and where we see magic happen, if you like, is where there's a really great working together of facilities and support services with those clinical staff to actually make it happen. So the clinical staff can do what they're focused on. So moving on to the solution, I think the importance of a program like this in implementing it, number one, is we have to have an engaged clinical team. And so what we saw at Isle of Wight was from the chief nurse to the microbiologist to infection control personnel, and also the clinicians involved in the whole ambulance service and patient transport really did engage with this whole concept of decontaminating emergency vehicles. The real breakthrough moment was when the operational people, so Andrew on the webinar today, got involved and actually got stuck in with the guys in the ambulance services and said, look, yes, these are our emergency vehicles, but actually, just like any other well-maintained fleet of vehicles, we have a program for them to be often out of action. So they have a maintenance program. And so we often do have opportunities to access these vehicles for them to be decontaminated. And so that was kind of a breakthrough moment, if you like. So we then set about developing a program that says, well, if we know these vehicles are going to be available, let's make sure they get decontaminated before going back into service. So there's kind of a two-pronged approach. One is a really regular programmed decontamination basis. And then the other aspect to it is kind of being opportunistic. So if for any reason a vehicle is taken out of action, make sure it gets decontaminated before it goes back into service. And so Isle of Wight actually achieved this with the use of the Peroxide, hydrogen peroxide vapor technology, which many of you on the call today have already got in your hospitals. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew Donegan from Isle of Wight, and he'll take you through in more detail how they actually implemented this solution.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, first of all, thanks very much for giving us the opportunity just to sort of tell you about the process that we've gone through here at the Isle of Wight. We're not professing to have all the answers. It is still work in progress, and one of the challenges is how we can continue that work. And if there's some people out there that can sort of help us out in that, then that we'll catch up with that at maybe the question and answer session. So what I'll do is I'll just go through the implementation points here. The young gentleman sat socially distanced, I must hasten to add, in the distances. This is Ernie, he's our Decontamination Champion. And so I'll go through sort of what we've got here, how we went about the process, and sort of just work our way through the slides. So the first thing that we had to do was meet the OSMs, the sort of office station managers. So we met with those just to sort of work out when the best days were to have the ambulances, how we could work alongside them. And so we run a pilot with the ambulance, and that was sort of closely done with Ernie, who went down there, built this relationship up with the office stations managers, to enable us to deliver that program there. So they will then make sure the vehicles are available for time and arrange and instruct. So what we actually arranged for was the make ready team. So they've got a crew down there, so they've got a make ready team. So the make ready team took the ambulance out of service, did what they needed to do down there, and then they make that available for us. So then we turn up down there with our equipment, and then we take over the responsibility for the full the further decontamination of that. So they prepare the vehicle for us. They give it a deep clean, empty, sort of open the cupboard doors, maximise the surface area for the vapour to work. And then what we do is where we can, we use a sort of available space within the ambulance and put the various bits of equipment that come with an ambulance. And I think they're a bit like a TARDIS really, because the amount of equipment they've got stashed away in the little doors and the areas, you know, sort of it all comes out. So we try where we can to maximise the use of the available space within the ambulance. So then we go through the normal process of taping up any air inlets and outlets, and there's not that many within an ambulance. And so that's the normal process that we would do in relation to the full decontamination process at any other situation. So then using the ramp with the piece of kit, we get the piece of kit into the back of the ambulance just to start that process. Thank you, Tartus. So one of the things that we tried to do was to sort of keep the main doors intact within that the cube at the back, or the patient area. So what we've done was we threaded once the machine's in situ in the middle there, we passed the wire, the power cable through what I call the serving hatch, or the crew hatch. And we also leave that open to maximise the vapour. We then pass that out of the passenger side window, so that's a very narrow gap along there, and then we secure that with the tape, and then that goes into the power source, and that enables the vehicle to start the process. Obviously, we shield the vehicle off and put the full signs and the sort of the health and safety aspects, so that nobody can actually go into that area while the decontamination process is taking place. So we sort of found that the ambulances take about 2 hours. So from the start of the process, you can sort of rely on about 2 hours, and then once the 2 hours has gone, Ernie would then go back down. He would use the full process of checking the air quality, and then what he would do then is he would sort of undo what he's done, which is to remove the cable, safely remove the TARDIS, the Peroxide machine, removing the tape, and then we would actually give that back to the ambulance service, and then they could do any additional checks that they wanted to do. We've also now, because they were sort of so pleased with what we were doing, they've moved the goalpost, if you like, and they've now said that we've got obviously a fleet of PTS vehicles, patient transport service vehicles as well. So what we're actually doing with the PTS vehicles is we're doing a PTS vehicle alongside an ambulance, and that allows us to sort of maximise the downtime of each of those vehicles. For those vehicles, it's usually about, again, it's a 2 hour process, but if they've got a bulkhead between the crew area and the patient area, then that takes about 1 hour 40 minutes. So the rest of the procedures that we would normally follow are what we've all had in terms of our training for the use of the Peroxide machines. Thank you, Tartus. So I suppose this is the bit that you're really interested in, because it's how do we make it possible? We've got a fleet of 30 ambulances and PTS vehicles. I suppose on the Isle of Wight, and since joining the trust, they've said that we are a unique trust because all our services are on the one site. So what we've done is, as I said, we sort of engaged with the ambulance service, and I've sort of done a few notes here. I suppose it's getting buy-in from people to make sure that that these people want to do that. So what I did to start with was I actually went through the full training, and we would, myself and Ernie and the Cleanliness Services Manager and what have you, we had the full training. So I wanted to understand how the process worked, what the do's and don'ts are for the process, and I suppose use it as an opportunity for myth busting as well, because staff that we've got that have training, they sort of have little conversations and tell us about things, but I wanted to actually be able to understand that process for myself. And then in the nicest possible way, we could start to speak with authority on the process, what's involved with the process and how that works. So that training also will allow me to be able to review our current practices for normal decontamination on ward areas. And actually, it's not that complicated, and I am a fully fledged card holder for HPV processing throughout the trust. So that was sort of, I think, one of the main things for me, because I always think if you can do that, if you can do it, you can speak with authority about that. So a champion then. So Ernie, who's sort of sitting in the background, and I'm led to believe is available for questioning afterwards if that's the case. So I nominated a decontamination champion, and I wanted that person to oversee the process and ensure that correct procedures are applied. But I also didn't want it to impact on myself, who was sort of trying to head up this project, the cleaning services department as well, because they're on with doing the day-to-day cleaning. And then let's not forget that while this has happened, that there was the disruption caused by a certain pandemic that was still sort of in the grips of at the moment. So I wanted to, as I said, get my decontamination champion. And so I've got down here. So what qualities were I looking for in my decontamination champion? So here we go. So communication skills. I think for me, that was the key aspect of it. So this young man is he's very plausible, he's very likable, he's knowledgeable, and he can email, he can phone, he can go and meet people, he can make those, he can make things happen as well. He's got the ability to build relationships, and he understands the whole picture and what we're trying to achieve as a trust in terms of decontamination. So I want him to have some good communication skills. Initiative, I want him to be able to go and do the work, and not to be able to have to spoon feed him, to set him off on a task and then off he goes and he delivers that as well. And I wanted him to buy into the bigger picture of the benefits for the staff and for patients as well. And then there is one more at the bottom here, and this is one of Ernie's, is punctuality. So he says here that you've got to be punctual, and if you say that you're going to be meeting somebody and you're going to be there at a certain time, so punctuality. So those were the sort of what we were looking for in terms of the champions to be able to make this to happen. And then we needed to receive buy-in from the wider trust. So as Tom sort of mentioned earlier on, I suppose if I just give you a little potted history, I've only been on the Isle of Wight since Christmas and quite new to joining the trust. So what happened was they did this as a trial last year, and received some excellent feedback and some excellent results. So we have sort of 3 meetings a week through the COVID criteria and the prices, sort of the pandemic. So I actually raised this as an action for myself in that meeting, because we had buy-in already from the Director of Nursing, the Infection Control team, the Consultant Microbiologist, and the Head of Nursing for Integrated Health and Emergency Care. So we got the buy-in already because they'd seen the positive results from a test earlier on. They just wanted it to actually happen. So we needed to make sure that it happened without too much cause or concern for the staff involved in that. So that's a bit of a potted history of how we made it happen. So if I can just ask you to move on, Tavis, thank you.
Good. So I'm just going to give you a bit more information about the Peroxide system that's been used at Isle of Wight. So Peroxide hydrogen peroxide system uses low concentration hydrogen peroxide solution. And that's combined with the high frequency ultrasonic vaporization technology that generates macroscopic droplets of hydrogen peroxide that rapidly evaporate to create vapor phase hydrogen peroxide. And the decontamination process is fully automated and do not require operator programming. So it has a built-in process analyzer that monitors the environment parameters during the process to ensure sufficient hydrogen peroxide concentration is achieved and maintained. And we're able to achieve log 6 reduction on C. diff spores. And as Andrew had mentioned that, you know, we do provide full training and the process is really easy. So our UltraV system uses high intensity UVC light to decontaminate all exposed surfaces. And UltraV is the only system that provides UVC light monitoring sensors to ensure successful feature deployment, with a validation report sent straight after the process. So we use these sensors called Spectrum, which we position all around the room to make sure that all the surfaces would get the right amount of UVC light. And the operator is fully in control of the process because everything is displayed on the process monitor that's outside of the room, so you can make decisions based on information provided to you. So Inivos Proxpod is portable and can be set up within a hospital healthcare setting, which is within a couple of hours. And Proxpods are fully sealed, so no room preparation, pre-treatment is required, providing a dedicated area for shared patient equipment decontamination or equipment from emergency vehicles in this case. And these pods are configured with WireX for ease of item positioning and optimal surface exposure to hydrogen peroxide vapor. So Prox has been developed to work seamlessly with Peroxide system to enable this good workflow, and the size is just only 2.4 by 2.4 meter by 2 meter height. So it's a really good solution for a flexible, agile solution for various item decontamination. Thanks. It's over to, I think it's Andrew.
Hopefully I'm unmuted and you can hear me now. So I suppose this is the bit where we go through what I suppose as a result of the pandemic. So I think now is the time, because again, looking at my notes here, that what's happened is that, so the current situation has meant that things have started to happen at
Sorry.
Have we lost Andrew?
Yeah, I was afraid to interrupt. I wasn't sure whether that was me. We had some Wi-Fi issues today, so we might have lost Andrew. So perhaps we'll give him a moment to try and join us back on the line. That's quite unusual, but given some of the issues we had.
Make sure that it's a safe. So by creating a routine that involves minimal effort for clinical staff, you can eliminate the perception that decontamination is not working.
Oh, we lost Andrew again. We'll give Andrew a chance to join us back. Sorry for this.
Maybe just to fill in, Taurus, whilst we wait for Andrew to rejoin, certainly from working with 110 odd hospitals up and down the country, that first point around there about COVID opening the minds to the value of decontamination, it's certainly something that we've seen up and down the country. Is whilst many of the people on this call today, infection prevention is kind of your life and your profession, the pandemic certainly has focused the minds of the executive teams. And often it's made budgets more available as well. And so whilst we're not here necessarily to talk about COVID, if we can use it as an opportunity, if that's the right way of putting it, to actually drive these quality improvement agendas that see benefits for our patients long into the future, I think we've certainly seen the benefit of that, haven't we, Taurus?
Definitely. And I think that's the whole point of trying to make educated decision based on these times of adverse times, and make sure that we don't lose the sight of what's actually important in the way of decontamination, and try and apply this technology that's available to try and to support the infection prevention measures, even in these times.
Yeah, very good. The second point that Andrew was going through, and I think we lost him around a pragmatic approach being essential. I think that's definitely something that we've proven time and again, is if we've got a clear risk-based methodology to what we're doing, then decision makers will buy into it. And so I think that was one of the things with the ambulance decontamination program at Isle of Wight, is that we could demonstrate that through doing environmental or surface sampling with the backs of ambulances, we could actually demonstrate a significant reduction of contamination from kind of the current baseline, if you like. And given that we've got a pragmatic operational solution that doesn't cause any disruption to the availability of the vehicles, it was something that was straightforward to implement.
Good. And would you like to try and cover the last point?
Sure. So in terms of a routine that involves minimal effort from clinical staff, I think it's a really important point, and it looks like hopefully Andrew's about to.
Andrew's back.
He's back.
Hello.
Nice to see you back.
Right, thank you. I must apologise for that. We did get warning the other day from our IT department, because of the heat on the island. We mustn't complain about the heat, and they did say that they could affect the servers and what have you. So I didn't know whether everybody else had dropped off, or was it just me?
No, we were just going through some of the notes of the guidance, but please do fill in what you've been prepared to say.
Yeah. So what we said was a pragmatic approach. And the other thing that I wanted to put across was the process that we've tried to do is where we're not impacting on the service. I know it sounds like you're impacting when you take an ambulance out, but when Ernie goes down to meet the ambulance crew to sort everything out, we initially set up with the managers. But then he goes down, he's got his contacts down there, so he doesn't impact on the managers at all. It allows them to get on with their day-to-day core business. And we sort of take on the ownership of that. All we request is that we get the vehicle. If you give us the vehicle at the agreed time, and Ernie touched on being punctual, he would turn up and he will deliver that service for them, and then he will make them aware that once the process is finished, the ambulance can go back into the system if they require it. So it was to minimise the impact on them, and that's sort of one of the key issues of there. And I suppose it was just about this is a golden opportunity to do things differently, to create the change and to make things happen. Those were sort of, I think, the key talking points that I wanted to get through on the guidance one there.
Good.
So I've spoken to Alice, who's our Director of Nursing, Midwifery and Community Services, and just wanted to sort of get a bit of a quotation really from Alice. I mean, when Ernie ever goes down to do the decontamination, he always gets a lot of interest from the ambulance staff, and they ask him quite a few questions, and we think it's been really well received down there. And then after speaking to Alice Webster, our Director of Nursing, she sort of quoted here that it has been great to work with Inivos on strengthening what has been a challenge for us for some time. The early evidence is showing that we are improving the standards of cleanliness in our ambulance/emergency vehicles, and we should consider whether this is best practice. Any improvement that makes everything safer for staff and patients is the right thing to do. Thank you, Tatus.
Excellent. Thanks, Andrew. So with this, well, we'd like to move on into our discussion. So Tom, do you want to carry away?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Andrea Trust. We've still got you. We can't see you at the moment, but the all right, there you go. We're back. So look, that's been really interesting and great to have that quote from Alice there. And it's been good working with her in the process. Have you had any other kind of feedback from staff so far? Maybe ambulance staff and others, infection control, etc.
Well, as I said, as I sort of touched on before, Tom, are you still there?
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know what's happened to my screen. It's just causing me some challenges. Aha, you're there. So what's happened is, as I said, when Ernie goes down, the ambulance crews, usually that are on duty that day, they come across, have a chat with him, and then sort of asking questions of why, what's he doing, why is he doing it, the benefits, and it has been really, really well received. And I suppose the other thing is that following the trial, the original trial, the microbiologist, as I said, the head of the ambulance nursing, they were keen to get this going as well. So they're sort of quite, sort of, I suppose, pleased that we've actually finally started to deliver this.
Yeah, that's great. And in terms, well, before I ask the next question, just a reminder to anybody who's got any questions, if you go to the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, feel free to submit any questions and we'll do our best to answer them. But Andrew, in terms of the next stage with this, I know this is something you've got up and running. What do you see as the next steps?
So for us, the next steps are, obviously we need to sort of get a bit slicker if we can in relation to what we're doing at the moment, and making sure that we keep the communication aspects going. And I suppose when I've sat and reflected on this prior to doing this webinar, is we need to engage with the ambulance staff a little bit more and maybe take 10 minutes of their time during the break and to sort of to preempt why we're doing it, what we're doing, and just engage with them. And then we've got the responder vehicles as well, because if you think about, they've got a whole host of equipment and grab bags that actually they need some decontamination. And then we've got some spare equipment, some spare trolleys and various pieces of kit for the ambulance crews. And so about how we can sort of get that through so that it's getting routinely done in terms of the decontamination. So I've touched on the communication, the rotation of essential spare equipment, the responder vehicles, and I suppose for us it's making sure that we maintain the momentum with the work that we're doing for the decontamination for the ambulances and what have you, and so that we don't just sort of sit on our laurels, that we start to continue this momentum and to carry that through. And I suppose the other one would be, I don't know whether I'm looking for potential income generation opportunities, but that's a different conversation.
No, and I think that's a really interesting one, and certainly something that's open to trust. And it's always interesting when we work with trusts who are kind of a bit enterprising and see the opportunity to do that. We've got some questions come in live, Andrew. I think people have been joining as we've been talking. So some of the things we might just cover again. One is, how long were the ambulances out of action?
So the ambulance, we've spoken to our ambulance crew, and we could have done them through the evening or through the night, but they've got a rotation of ambulances. So they're actually, I can't speak for the make ready crew. The make ready crew, it sounds like a bit of a pop band really, don't it? But the make ready crew, what they do is they prepare the vehicle for us. And then we go down and do the technical bit with the decontamination. And Ernie, so realistically, Ernie, how long?
So you have the 2 hours for decontamination, and you say the make ready team probably take half an hour to put all this stuff back in the cupboards and make it ready.
And the preparation time?
Probably half an hour again.
Yeah, so from Ernie arriving down there to him leaving, you'd probably be looking at, I say realistically, under 3 hours, because he needs to prepare the vehicle and move the equipment round, run the cables, and then he needs to undo that process. So he needs to, once it's passed its air testing qualities and things like that. So again, you're probably looking at about 15-20 minutes to that. So within under 3 hours, you could have the vehicle turned around.
So that's really good. And so as we covered off earlier in the webinar, whilst we're talking of a blue light service that needs to be available, there are opportunities when there's planned downtime of these vehicles, isn't there? So for example, if an ambulance was going for its routine maintenance and it was on the forecourt for another 3 hours whilst it had an oil change, nobody would bat an eyelid. And we can use that same opportunity to decontaminate that ambulance before it comes back into service.
Yeah. And planned as well. Planned. As I said, we just want the vehicle, but if you work with the ambulance station, which I'm sure that they'll see the benefits of it, and so I'm sure they'll see the benefits and work with you on that. And that's where your champion and his communication skills, negotiation skills can go and make those available for you.
Sure. So, so we've got some really interesting questions coming through. One is did we do any environmental sampling to validate the process? I can cover that one off quickly. So the quick answer to that is yes, we did. And the results that we saw were actually quite similar to what we'd see in kind of the typical hospital environment, in as much as your high touch points had a level of contamination that, you know, maybe in some instances we kind of we're a bit surprised by. I think the blood pressure monitor cuffs, especially, and then typically what we find, as we do with the hospital environment, is manual cleaning reduces about 40 to 50% of the contamination, and then the decontamination process reduced surface contamination to typically undetectable levels. So it's not something that's been published yet, but we did that work locally, and I'm sure we may look to put it in a poster or something in due course.
Tom, if I could just add there, I did speak to our consultant microbiologist and explain to her that we were going to be doing the webinar and how could we justify sort of the results. And sort of what she was saying was, whilst it's difficult to quantify the results, based on the original test and the retest and the re-swabbing afterwards, the process demonstrated it was certainly worthwhile, and there was a difference. It might have even been a considerable difference. So that's what her take on the results was.
Sure. So we've got an interesting question saying, do we think that this should become national guidance? What's your take on that, Andrew?
Well, I suppose we're in the very early stages of what we've done so far. So in terms of the trust, but yes, I mean, anything you can do to sort of reduce the risk and to give confidence to staff and staff, patients, it's got to be a positive thing. I suppose it's just the logistics involved in that. And we're quite fortunate with our site and how it's set up. But yes, I would have said it's a positive thing.
I think national guidance is an interesting one, isn't it? And for the different countries around the world that we work with have got different approaches. But even take north of the Scottish border here, they're much more guidance focused, whereas south of the border, we tend to have much more autonomy in what we do. And I think there are fors and against of both. But I think what we've got the opportunity to do here is this is something that where you've done some local testing that demonstrates, as you say, it's definitely a worthwhile process. And another question, Andrew, around the frequency. So what frequency do you look to decontaminate a particular ambulance?
So this is, it's a difficult one. But what we do, we've got 2 designated days available to do the vehicles. So we're doing the vehicles on a Wednesday and a Thursday. So we've got 2 vehicles made available. So we're sort of halfway, I suppose, working through our fleet. But the frequency, I suppose, depends on what your availability is. But what we're trying to do now is get through all the ambulances, and then we'll start that as a rolling program. And I suppose when you said about the next steps, one of the next steps that I should have touched on was that if the vehicle has found itself in a situation where there's a particular risk or increased risk of contamination from the patient that it's actually transported, then what we need to be able to do is to be able to respond and react to that as well. So that I don't know if that answers your question, Tom, but that's something that I suppose we need to consider. And it is, as I said, we're in the very early infant stages of this project.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and we often get asked, you know, if we're looking at a proactive decontamination program throughout the hospital itself, what frequency should we look to decontaminate areas? And I think really it comes back to that understand, design, deliver, and a risk-based pragmatic approach. And so when we're talking of the hospital itself, typically we'd be looking at history of infections, and then things like patient susceptibility. So hematology, oncology environment, we'd look to decontaminate more frequently than a general medical ward. And I think we just need to take a view on the level of risk from ambulances and PTS vehicles. Taldus, there's an interesting question that I'd like to address to you, and that is there any evidence of degradation of materials or surfaces through repeated exposure to the hydrogen peroxide? Would you comment on that?
Yeah, so hydrogen peroxide has been used in healthcare and laboratory environment for a long time to decontaminate those spaces. And hydrogen peroxide, generally speaking, has excellent material compatibility. So I wouldn't expect any of the materials in the ambulance or blue light services to have any worse compatibility than any other care environments. And hydrogen peroxide is being used in operating theatres and side rooms on a daily basis. And we complete hundreds of processes every week. And there's a lot of research done, and we've conducted quite a few studies ourselves to try and see, how different materials react. And consensus is that hydrogen peroxide, specifically, we use low concentration hydrogen peroxide that our technology allows us to, has excellent material compatibility. So I wouldn't see any concerns there.
Thanks. Yeah, there's another question around: has this been routinely used as an extra precaution for COVID transfers? And if I can just speak up for that one, I think COVID hasn't been your motivator here, has it, Andrew? This has been something that the trust has been working on for a while, but certainly with COVID, it's an interesting one. And we've actually been working with some of the air ambulance trusts, MAGPAS in particular, have kind of led the way on this. Around what we do around air ambulances and their emergency vehicles. And with a similar approach to what you're taking, Andrew, they've actually introduced the ProxPod decontamination chamber. And so the kind of the grab bags and the equipment from those vehicles goes into a chamber. We wheel the peroxide system in there, and then those objects get decontaminated. So whilst the peroxide system itself may not necessarily be able to get in the back of a air ambulance, there's a lot that we can do to prevent contamination risk. I think it's great we're getting so many questions from the audience, but I'm also conscious of everybody's time. So just an interesting one here, Taldus. Do we think that that work needs to be done to the design of our ambulances to make them easier to decontaminate? Maybe that's your next project.
Yeah, absolutely. So I honestly believe that all of the decontamination or infection prevention measures should be built in, whether that's, the emergency vehicles or side rooms or new hospitals that we're hoping to build in the next couple of years. So absolutely, I think when we specify, emergency vehicles, we should think about infection prevention measures and leveraging all of the existing technologies like UVC light or hydrogen peroxide vapor. So the answer is yes, the design should reflect, the ability to employ those technologies.
And in the words of our infection control nurse, here we go. It was said that the vehicles could be viewed as incubation boxes on wheels for a whole host of microorganisms.
There you go.
I don't think we can improve on that, Andrew. In terms of designing in decontamination and infection prevention, though, it's a really important aspect of what we're doing, and I think we've got a great opportunity now as everybody stands back and we look at our facilities. So that is from two aspects. Number one, we're hoping to have a number of new hospitals go up around the country, but also a number of hospitals currently are reconfiguring areas like CCU, etc. Taldus, do you want to touch on the UltraV Connect technology that we've developed that actually gives hospitals a built-in decontamination ability?
Exactly. So when we looked at all the benefits the UltraV system brings to the decontamination stage, if you like, given that the rapid process times and the ability to deploy really quickly and quick turnaround time, what we realized that these environments would benefit from a built-in system that could be deployed immediately after the patient had been discharged. So instead of waiting, because one of the challenges was that most of the time, the side room was basically waiting for the system to attend the room. So what we've developed is this fixed UVC decontamination system that leverage all the technology that UltraV has, including the validation of the process cycle and all the reports that you get into your inbox, at the switch of the button. So basically you have this process monitor outside of the room where you can pick your decontamination program with your UVC system, UltraV Connect, fixed into the room, always available to do the decontamination process, which is, I think, is a great step in having these built-in systems that kind of can be deployed as soon as they're required without any of the downtime waiting for the technology to be made available.
Sure. So yeah, by all means, there's more information on the website, and we can discuss that with anybody who's interested. Andrew, maybe just the last question to wrap up, because I'm conscious of the time. I think one of the really important factors of how you got this off the ground is Ernie, essentially. So having a decontamination champion, and like I mentioned earlier on, often cleaning and decontamination is viewed as kind of this reactive only service, and being able to effectively deploy a proactive service often is about having dedicated resource to do that. Would you have any insights into how you kind of got the sign off or presented the case for a proactive resource?
Well, Tom, I seized the opportunity with the current pandemic and what was going on there, because we was sort of looking at doing things differently, how we could do things differently, and some of the activity within the hospital started to slow down, so we've got to make a case for this, because we're in a trial situation. But in 6 months' time, then I'm hoping to present sufficient evidence that says that this is how many decontamination ambulances that we can do. And you've touched on the proactive side of the decontamination as well. And I suppose, I don't know whether you want to invite me back or not, but that's something that we're looking at doing there. We've also got our prox pods, so we've got 2 of those as well. So it's about how we maximize those. So hopefully that, the trust are going to get value for money. We've got these pieces of kit, and I don't know whether I'm speaking out of turn, but they're not the cheapest pieces of kit. But they're sat in cupboards, not working, and I want to sweat our assets. So for the cost of a champion or a team to be able to deliver that service, and what the trusts are going to benefit and what they're going to get for that, and what that's going to give our patients, surely they've got to make a strong case for the investment and the recruiting of champions. I don't know whether that answers your question, Tom. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That's great, and I think it comes down to the level of belief from yourself and from the clinical teams to actually champion this, and belief from the exec team as well to see it through. So look, there have been some really great insights, and thanks for sharing those with us, Andrew. Appreciate your time today, and we've certainly enjoyed working with you on this project. And sounds like we'll be having another webinar in a while talking about your proactive programs throughout the hospital. But we run these webinars every 3 weeks. So thanks everybody who's joined, and stay tuned for our next topic.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Ernie. It was lovely to catch up. And we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.